Conventional chemical fertilizers are known to accelerate the loss of soil carbon and the loss of beneficial soil microbes that require carbon to live. And you may have heard of something called the carbon to nitrogen ratio. Now, carbon to nitrogen ratio is exactly why this top point is a fact. When just nitrogen by itself, which is only available in the chemical forms, there's no purified organic nitrogen that's just nitrogen. There's always other stuff in there. But if you give just nitrogen to the soil, the microbes in that soil need, just like in a compost pile, those microbes need a certain balance or ratio of carbon to nitrogen. So for every gram or milligram of carbon that those microbes can eat, they need a certain amount of nitrogen to go with it. And if you're only adding nitrogen to the soil as a chemical, then what you're doing is mining the carbon that's already in that soil, because the microbes are eating that carbon that's already there and releasing it as gases out to the environment. So it's very important to keep track of the carbon content and top it up when needed, because I mean there's compost, there's biochar, there's cover crops, there's all sorts of stuff that can be added to the soil to increase carbon content. Another good strategy is giving that plot of land a season off or a year off to and just grow a plant there and till it in afterwards and not harvest it. This is something I'm sure everyone in the room has probably seen, but I think it's just worth considering, like, what is soil health, and it's all three of these things. It's the physical, the chemical, and the biological, and no one is more important than the others because they're all essential. And when I say chemical, I mean chemical in the broad sense of chemistry, not chemical fertilizers. So soil health exists in that nexus where the physical, chemical, and biological are all up. So soil is made from mineral and biological components that affect the structure of soil. It's weathered rocks, and it's microbes and rotting plant material and rotting microbes that make something soil as opposed to just sand or pure silt or something like that. Conventional fertilizers harm the biology of soil by creating the imbalance that I just... So here's another diagram some of you have probably seen before. It shows the different components of a biologically healthy soil. It starts with plants with healthy roots and sufficient organic matter, synonymous with carbon in the soil, and then that supports the beneficial fungi and bacteria, along with nematodes. Nematodes are these worm-like microbes in soil that sometimes get a bad name because, like bacteria, some of them are pathogens, but most of them are not, and some of them are really are indicators of healthy things going on. But another thing I encourage anyone who's interested to Google pictures of nematodes they're beautiful. The biggest nematodes are like 2 centimeters long, I think. And the smallest ones are, barely visible with the naked eye or not at all. But when you look at them under a microscope, they look like monsters from, like, if you've seen the movie Dune, like the giant sandworms. Like they're just like so many soil microbes. They're beautifully terrifying, scaled up. And that goes for like the arthropods, which are like they're described as shredders and predators because some of them, are eating rotting plant material and breaking it all apart, and other arthropods are carnivorous and eating, other bugs. And it's a whole, in a handful of healthy soil, there are more living organisms than there are human beings on Earth in one handful of soil. And that's not like, some magic soil that I saw once. That's a blanket statement that's true across the board. I mean, it took me a while in my career to really wrap my head around it, that in that handful of soil, it's a whole ecosystem, or even more than that. It's many different ecosystems within there, and all these different, like every one of these types of organisms, there's all different species, and they each have a biological niche that, is something that they do, and they're dependent on each other. So nurturing this, like the cycle of life inside the soil, is really key to having a soil that's productive. This is a diagram that I made in PowerPoint, and it just shows what I was talking. It shows visually what I was talking about earlier with the mycorrhizal fungi extending the plant roots. So this is a very magnified plant root, and this is the channel of the middle of the root that the water and nutrients travel up through. And these are the fine root hairs that you can see when you look at a root really closely. And those root hairs are what pull the nutrients into the root and then ultimately up into the plant. And the mycorrhizae attach to those fine root hairs and then come all the way out, 10 times as far away or more, and bring those nutrients in. Just a term I should have introduced earlier, Rhizophere. One of my favorite words. Is actually the name of my old dog as well. Yeah, Rhizo for short. So the Rhizophere is, there are two types of soil, biologically or physically. You've got what's called bulk soil, which is all the soil that's not shown in this diagram, and then there's the Rhizophere, which is the sphere of soil around a living root. And that's important because that Rhizophere is where all this life is happening. That's where the microbes are. That's where they're thriving. That's where their life cycles are happening. In the bulk soil, away from the Rhizophere, so bulk soil over here or over here, or down here, that soil is comparatively devoid of life. Because it's sort of like, I mean, in our context, it would be like a desert to them. If there's no plant roots in there, there's no if there's no plant roots or material breaking or rotting material, there's nothing for the microbes to live on, and so they gravitate towards where life is easy, and that is the Rhizophere. Here's another example of what mycorrhizae do, and this data I selected from some of the scientific work of Clive Sinclair, the late founder of Pacific Biofert. They did this work where they measured the phosphorus concentration in the plant. Some of the plants inoculated with mycorrhizae, and other plants not. This graph over here has added phosphorus. And you can see that there's more phosphorus that ends up in the plant with mycorrhizae present, regardless of how much phosphorus is added. And this ties into another issue that is important in New Zealand, which is excessive applications of phosphorus, because there's so much phosphorus in New Zealand that's just chemically locked up in the soil because of pH or because of other factors, and that it can be released and made available again. And that's information that should be available to every farmer when they get their soil tested. But it seems to get lost somewhere along the way. Chemical fertilizer company is doing the testing and telling the farmer how to interpret the results. There needs to, in order for effective change to happen, I think there needs to be an impartial third party to give truthful advice where they're not profiting